As the Roman Republic spread its wings and engulfed the Mediterranean, its borders soon stretched across many disparate tribes, peoples, and cultures. By 100 BC, Rome ruled over Greeks, Gauls, Italians, Illyrians, and many, many more. To deal with administering such a vast empire, they divided their overseas territories into provinces, each governed by a former magistrate. A Roman governor had impressive powers in both civilian and military spheres. In Italy itself, however, the story was a little different. When the Republic conquered an Italian tribe or city, instead of directly absorbing them, they were turned into socii, a Latin word which means allies. That was a fairly apt description for these conquered peoples, who were given a degree of autonomy whilst sharing the burdens of military service with the Romans, being required to supply half of the Republic's legions. So the peninsula became a patchwork quilt of full Roman citizens, those who held more limited Latin rights, and the socii. But by the time the 1st century BC rolled around, Italy itself began to fray at the edges. Slowly but surely, talk of Italian citizenship began to grow in pitch, as the injustices of the system became painfully clear, going from malcontented grumblings to all-out war over the course of the 90s BC. For starters, the Italian allies were second-class citizens. They were not protected from arbitrary arrests or punishments, and the lack of voting rights was a point of contention for the upper class. The poor were probably less concerned about voting rights, since most couldn't afford the journey to Rome. It was nevertheless a key point of contention. Italian communities were also less able to protect themselves against land confiscations by Roman authorities. Bills aimed at either giving the Italians full citizenship or the more limited Latin rights had been attempted before, but time and time again they were blocked by the conservatives in Rome. The Roman Senate was characteristically tone-deaf in its refusal to contemplate full Italian citizenship, yet they were not entirely above compromise. Back in the 1020s, the Senate had tried to stymie calls for Italian citizenship by allowing some Italians to apply. There were some catches though. First, they had to hold Latin rights, basically a watered-down version of citizenship. Second, they had to be wealthy. Third, they had to have served as a local magistrate. The Senate hoped that this scheme, known as civitas per magistratum, or citizenship through magistracies, would stop wealthy Italians joining the discontent. Briefly this worked, but soon it would backfire, and quite spectacularly. The famous Roman general Gaius Marius made a habit of giving citizenship to Italian battalions that served well in battle, stating that on the field of battle he could not tell Italians apart from Romans. Marius's hometown had only been given citizenship one generation prior to his birth, so he always looked favourably upon the Italians. This created a trickle of Italians who returned home with full Roman citizenship which their friends and families did not share. In 97, the civitas per magistratum scheme reared its head once more, with destabilising consequences. Many wealthy Italians just lied about having served as a local magistrate. Eventually, the Romans sensed that something was afoot, and expelled all the Italians from Rome while they cleaned up the census data. Expulsions like this were not new, but it had the effect of jettisoning many wealthy Italians into hotbeds of disgruntlement, where they would play important roles in the war to come. As discontent grew, an up-and-coming Roman politician met with the leader of the Marsi tribe in central Italy. The Marsian leader, a man named Quintus Popadius Silo, obviously supported Italian citizenship. The young politician, Marcus Livius Drusus, was soon convinced as well. It was during this meeting that they both solemnly swore their dedication to the cause of Italian citizenship, a cause that would soon cost both their lives. Drusus was aligned with the Optimates, the faction that broadly sought to uphold the power of the Senate on the political scales. Yet he was also a reformer. In 91, Drusus was selected to propose a batch of laws aimed at strengthening the Senate's power. However, the Optimates anticipated resistance, so Drusus decided to throw Italian citizenship into the mix as well, in order to bring more support behind his pro-senatorial measures. Viewed in this light, support for citizenship seems more like a cynical political move. Drusus's enemies certainly thought so. On that note, I should mention that it wasn't just pig-headedness that made many Romans wary of Italian citizenship. The average Roman politician was perhaps the most competitive creature in the ancient world, constantly sniffing for advantages and hankering after advancement. So if one man was able to give all Italians citizenship, that man would suddenly have the undying gratitude of millions of newly enfranchised citizens. Citizens that might become his clients and vote for him in elections, instantly making him a political superstar. For the others, this would represent an intolerable shift in the political balance of power. Drusus's enemies vehemently opposed him, and as a result the Italian citizenship bill was either never proposed or simply voted down. Unhappy at the outcome, Popadius Silo led 10,000 Marsi towards Rome. This was less of an army and more of a protest march. Eventually he was persuaded to go home, but it was clear to all that the Italians were deeply unhappy. The straw that broke the camel's back finally came in 91. Drusus had made many enemies during his career, and they finally caught up with him in that year. On a dark night, some assassins slipped into his house and slew him. The culprits were unknown, but the Italians were quick to point the finger at their Roman overlords. Whether they knew it or not, the trigger had just been pulled on Italy's most massive war yet. Even the Senate woke up to the sheer level of revulsion with which it was viewed, and they sent some senators out into the peninsula to get the measure of things. One such envoy went to the city of Asculum, where he was promptly seized and killed. The war was on. The fires of rebellion spread quickly from there on, until much of the peninsula was aflame. Almost overnight, Italy was cleaved in two, as Rome was encircled by a ring of rebels. Not since the times of Hannibal had armies so large and so bitterly hostile been so close to Rome. Rome had spurned her so-called allies for the last time, and it's from the Latin word for allies, socii, that the social war got its name. The socii came together to form a coalition against Rome. They established their capital at Corfinium, a city slap bang in the centre of Italy. They named their new nation and their new capital after their shared dream, Italia. For decades the Italians had pursued civitas, citizenship. Now they set their sights on a different goal, libertas, or freedom. Yet for all the talk of freedom, it was painfully clear that in the choice between civitas and libertas, the Italians were still desperate for the former. This can be seen most clearly in the institutions of the new Italian state, which were modelled very closely on Rome's, only being more decentralised. Many still hankered after citizenship, but it remained to be seen whether the Romans would be too pig-headed to give it to them. In the early stages of the war, the Italians scored victories in the south and the north, forcing the Romans onto the back foot. Up north, the Roman Rutilius Lupus was doing particularly badly. He was the nephew of Gaius Marius, but Lupus refused to listen to any of his uncle's advice, making several blunders before dying in an ambush. Marius briefly commanded the army before the suspicious Senate replaced him. The new commander also got himself killed, so Marius took the reins once again and won a battle in 90. Marius was quickly replaced again, this time by Pompey Strabo, father of Pompey Magnus, who led them for the rest of the war. Yet Marius's victory in the north was just one against a slew of defeats, and if the revolt spread, it would spell the end for Rome. Seeing no other option, the Lex Julia was promulgated, granting full citizenship to any Italians who had not yet joined the revolt. This took the wind out of the Italian sails and stopped the spread of the rebellion, while on other fronts the Romans began to roll back the Italian advance. Pompey Strabo led a vigorous campaign in the north, eventually capturing Asculum after a tough siege. Strabo was not merciful in victory, and butchered the populace. More successes followed when the up-and-coming Lucius Cornelius Sulla led a lightning campaign in the south, capturing many rebel strongholds. The Lex Julia was reinforced in 89 by the Lex Plautia Papiria, which gave citizenship to all Italians so long as they laid down arms. By 88, this combination of military and legal pressure had put the rebels on the back foot, and the Italian cause crumbled, mostly to Samnium, an ancient hotbed of anti-Roman sentiment, as well as a few other scattered strongholds. Finally, towards the end of that year, Popadius Silo was killed in battle in Apulia. The game was up, but while Rome had won the war, it's fair to say that the Italians won the peace. Every Italian now held full Roman citizenship. A few bastions held out longer, but by 87 BC the social war was over. It had been as devastating as it was unnecessary. Farms were ruined, many fell into debt, and Italy suffered a currency shortage. Not everyone had a cause for misery though. Sulla's victories catapulted him to new heights, and he was elected consul for 88. His rise in power led him into conflict with Marius, and sent him down the path that would eventually lead to him marching on Rome. Similarly, Pompey Strabo's successes in the north also advanced his career. By now though, the Republic's attentions were already focused east, where another conflict was tearing up Asia, the Mithridatic War. And while the Italians were able to vote, the senators slyly made it so that their votes were worthless by lumping them all into the final voting tribes. In short, this meant that their votes would hardly ever be called upon, because Roman tribes were called in order. The Italian question had been answered. But by deviously watering down their voting rights, the Romans left a festering wound that would be exploited by ambitious and unscrupulous politicians in the future. Many thanks to Chris Manger, the channel's Consul tier member.